I had always been the daughter everyone pointed to with pride. Claire is so dedicated. Claire has a bright future. Claire is going to go far. At 35, I can say I've fulfilled every expectation placed on my shoulders. Graduating with honors, building a stable career, and owning my own apartment. All achieved through hard work, countless sleepless nights, and a constant feeling that it was never enough. Meanwhile, my younger sister Rachel, 3 years my junior, seemed to float through life like a feather in the wind, without commitments, without pressure, without consequences. I remember the nights when I'd help Dad sort through the bills while listening to Rachel laughing in the room next door, chatting on the phone with friends. "Leave your sister alone, Claire. She's still young. She has time to learn," he would say with that tired smile. The very smile that vanished when cancer took him 5 years ago, leaving us with an inheritance of debts and poorly managed secrets. It was at his wake that I realized how different Rachel and I had become. While I handled the funeral arrangements, signing papers and receiving condolences with a lump in my throat, she wept openly, received hugs, and was consoled. My pain was locked away in a drawer of formalities and responsibilities. Her pain was embraced and understood. I don't blame her for that. I blame myself for becoming so controlled that even in mourning I couldn't show any vulnerability. My mother's apartment, Mrs. Helen's, always felt like a minefield of memories. Every corner held a reminder of when we were a supposedly functional family. The dining table, in particular, was the stage for our greatest tensions masked as normalcy. It was there that, at age 12, I learned Mom was expecting Rachel. It was there that, at 17, I announced my acceptance to college and realized Dad cared more about overdue bills than my academic future. It was there that, at 28, I silently heard that Rachel had dropped out of college for the 3rd time to find her way. And it was exactly at that table that 2 weeks ago, Mom called me, urging me to come immediately. "We need to talk about your father's inheritance," she said, her voice trembling. "A lawyer will be here tomorrow, and we need to be ready." I arrived promptly at 7, as always. The aroma of roasted chicken and potatoes filled the house, a recipe Mom used when she wanted to soften bad news. 40 minutes later, Rachel arrived, her hair disheveled, dark circles under her eyes, muttering apologies about traffic, even though she lived just 10 minutes away. "Finally, we can eat," Mom sighed as she served the dishes with a precision that betrayed her nervousness. "Mr. Mitchell will be here tomorrow at 10. He's a lawyer specializing in estate law and can help us with the situation." The situation. That was how we referred to the financial disaster Dad had left behind. Unpaid bills, predatory loans, failed investments. For 5 years, I've been the one organizing documents, negotiating with banks, and setting up payment plans. All while Rachel continued her carefree life, occasionally asking if things were getting better between one trip and another that, curiously, she always managed to fund. "What exactly can he do that I haven't already tried over the years, Mom?" I asked, cutting into my chicken with more force than necessary. "He discovered some assets your father had, stocks in a company that was sold. It seems there's a considerable sum, Claire." Her eyes sparkled with a hope that irritated me deeply. After everything we'd been through, she still believed in magic solutions. "But we need the right documents. You know where they are, don't you?" Of course I did. I always knew where everything was. I was, after all, the emotional and bureaucratic GPS of the family. "They're in the blue folder at my apartment," I replied curtly. "I can bring them tomorrow." Rachel, who had been absent-mindedly scrolling on her phone while eating, finally spoke up. "That's great. Imagine if we have enough money to renovate the house, Mom. Your room desperately needs an upgrade." I felt my blood boil. 5 years of sacrifice. Over time, even borrowing from my own paycheck to keep Mom from losing the house. And Rachel was already planning how to spend money that we didn't even know existed. "Before we think about renovations, we need to pay off the remaining debts," I snapped, trying to keep my voice even. "And maybe, just maybe, I can get back part of what I invested to keep both of you under a roof." A heavy silence fell over the table. Mom swallowed hard, her wrinkled hands trembling slightly as she set down her fork. "Claire, you know how grateful I am for everything you've done. But if this money comes, it's family money. Family," I repeated bitterly, as a sharp laugh bubbled up in my throat. "It's funny how I'm only considered family when you need my financial or bureaucratic help. For the last 3 Christmases, I found out about plans at the last minute because you all forgot to tell me ahead of time. That's not fair, protested Rachel, finally setting her phone aside. You're always too busy with work. It's hard to count on you. I'm busy working to pay the bills Dad left behind, which you all pretend don't exist, I shouted louder than I meant to. Meanwhile, you travel, go out, and spend money you don't have, and Mom always makes excuses. Rachel is finding her way. Well, I'd like to find my way too, without carrying the weight of this family on my shoulders. Mom placed her hands on the table, a gesture we'd known since childhood, signaling that we needed to calm down. Girls, tomorrow we have an important meeting. We can't show up for Mr. Mitchell's visit as a disjointed family. What will he think? And there it was, the eternal worry about appearances. It didn't matter if we were falling apart on the inside, as long as we appeared to be a happy family to the world. Honestly, Mom, I don't care what some stranger lawyer thinks of us, I said, pushing my plate aside. What matters is that I've been carrying a burden for 5 years that should have been shared. And when a glimmer of hope finally appeared, you were already planning how to spend it without even acknowledging my sacrifice. Rachel rolled her eyes, a familiar gesture that hurt more than words. Always the drama, Claire. Always you. As the family martyr. No one asked you to take on all those responsibilities. That was the last straw. Years of frustration and resentment spilled over like a breached dam. No one asked? No one asked? I banged my hand on the table, making the silverware clink. When Dad died and you disappeared for 2 weeks, who stayed by Mom's side? When the creditors started calling, who answered? When the house almost went to auction, who negotiated a deal? I didn't take on these responsibilities because I wanted to be a martyr, Rachel. I did it because someone had to, and you were too busy finding your way. Warm tears streamed down my face, tears I hadn't shed in front of them for years. It was as if an invisible armor had finally cracked. You both. Stop this right now. Mom's voice trembled, yet it carried the firmness that always commanded respect. Tomorrow at 10 Quant, Mr. Mitchell will be here, and we need to present a united front. Claire, bring the documents. Rachel, please be on time. And both of you, behave like adults, not like teenagers fighting over a borrowed dress. The rest of dinner passed in a heavy silence, broken only by the clinking of cutlery. When we finished, I helped Mom wash the dishes while Rachel slipped out to the backyard, probably to smoke, a habit she thought Mom was unaware of. She isn't a bad person, Claire, Mom whispered as she dried a plate. She just didn't have to grow up as fast as you did. I bit my tongue, not saying that was exactly my complaint. Why did I have to grow up so quickly while Rachel could? Remain forever irresponsible? Instead, I murmured, I'll bring the documents tomorrow, Mom. Don't worry. I left the house with a familiar heaviness in my chest, a weight I'd never gotten used to carrying. In the car, I allowed myself to cry properly, the kind of crying I only did when I was alone. I cried for the little girl who was never allowed to be just a daughter, always forced to be the pillar. I cried for the woman I postponed being so I could fix Dad's mistakes. And I cried for the family we never had, a family where responsibilities and affections were shared equally. Back home, I retrieved the blue folder containing 5 years of meticulous dedication. Each document was proof of how hard I fought to keep our family afloat. As I organized everything for the next day, messages from Rachel began flashing on my phone. Sorry about dinner. You know how tense things get when we touch on that subject. I didn't reply immediately. Part of me wanted to ignore her, as she often did when things got tough, but another part was simply tired of this endless cycle. It's not about dinner, Rachel. It's about years of imbalance. But tomorrow, I'll be there, as I always have been. Her reply came almost instantly. I know it seems like I don't appreciate what you do, but I do. I just don't know how to help without making everything worse. That message caught me off guard. It was the first time in years that Rachel showed any hint of self-awareness about her role, or lack thereof, in our family's problems. Tomorrow is a new day. Maybe we can finally turn the page. I fell asleep with the blue folder by my side, like armor for the battle that lay ahead. The next morning brought that familiar anxiety that always accompanied important meetings. I arrived at Mom's house at 9:30 sharp, as always. To my surprise, Rachel was already there, her hair still damp from the shower, quietly sipping coffee in the kitchen. I got here early, she said with a timid smile. I thought I'd help get things organized. I nodded, unsure how to react to this responsible version of my sister. Mom, impeccably dressed in her navy blue suit reserved for special occasions, looked relieved to see us without immediate hostility. Mr. Mitchell called. "He's on his way," she informed us, nervously straightening the picture frames on the shelf, an obvious attempt to make the house look more organized than it really was. At 10:05, the doorbell rang. A tall man with graying hair and thin-rimmed glasses entered our living room. Mr. Mitchell had that commanding presence that experienced lawyers cultivate, a blend of formality and measured calm. "Mrs. Helen, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person," he said, shaking Mom's hand. "And these must be your daughters." After introductions, we all sat in the living room with the blue folder spread open on the coffee table. Mr. Mitchell examined the documents carefully, occasionally asking technical questions that invariably were directed at me. "Impressive how you've kept everything organized, Mrs. Claire," he commented, after reviewing a stack of payment receipts. "I see you've managed the family's finances with great competence." Before I could reply, Mom interjected, "Claire has always been our rock. I don't know what we would have done without her." The compliment, although sincere, rang bitter in my ears. Why was my dedication only recognized now, in the presence of a stranger? "And what about the stock information?" I asked, steering the conversation toward why we were there. Mr. Mitchell adjusted his glasses and pulled a folder from his briefcase. "Your father, Mrs. Helen, was a minority shareholder in a tech company founded in 2003. At the time, it was just a small startup, and the investment seemed insignificant. However, that company was acquired by a multinational corporation 8 months ago, and the stocks have appreciated considerably." He showed us documents, graphs, and figures. According to his estimates, the stocks were worth approximately $1, $2 million. The shock was evident on all our faces. Mom put her hands to her mouth. Rachel muttered an expletive in astonishment, and I felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that our financial struggles might soon end, and anger that Dad had hidden this investment from us, leaving us to struggle for years. "To access these funds," Mr. Mitchell continued, "we need to prove that you are the legitimate heirs and resolve a few tax issues. With the documents you provided, Mrs. Claire, much of the work is already done. I estimate we can complete the process in about 3 months." The remainder of the meeting was spent on bureaucratic details and signatures. Mr. Mitchell expressed genuine admiration for my financial know-how, knowledge I had acquired by force over the last 5 years. When he finally left, leaving us with a mix of hope and disbelief, silence returned to the room. It was Rachel who finally broke it. $1.2 million, she murmured, as if testing how the words sounded. "Dad had all that money and never told us. He probably didn't know it was worth that much," Mom replied, ever ready to defend Dad even after his passing. "Your father was never good with investments." "He did know," I countered firmly. "I found letters from a brokerage among his documents. They were quarterly updates on the company's performance. He followed it, but he chose not to share it with us." That revelation hit the room like a bomb. Mom paled, and Rachel abruptly got up and walked to the window. "Why didn't you say that sooner?" Mom asked, visibly shaken. "Because it wouldn't have made any difference," I answered honestly. "The stocks were locked until the company's acquisition. We couldn't access them before, and part of me didn't want to shatter the image you all had of him." It was true. Despite all the anger, all the sleepless nights spent fixing problems he created, I never wanted Mom or Rachel to know the full extent of his secrets. But now, with the prospect of finally closing that painful chapter, the truth seemed the only possible path. "I always knew he lied about money," said Rachel, her back still turned. "I remember when he used to give me a hidden allowance and told me it was our little secret, that you and Mom wouldn't understand." That confession struck like a punch. While I had been working since I was 16 to help cover the household expenses, Dad was secretly giving Rachel money to spend as she pleased. "Why are we only hearing about this now?" I asked, struggling to keep the hurt out of my voice. Rachel finally turned around, tears in her eyes, a rare sight, because it was the only thing we had, just the two of us. "You were always the perfect daughter, Claire, the smart one, the responsible one, the one everyone admired. I was just the other daughter, the one who never fit the mold." Mom, who had been silently watching our exchange, slowly stood up. "I think we're all to blame here," she said, her voice laden with an old sadness. "Your father and I, we were never good at communicating, and we ended up creating this gap between you two without even realizing it." She walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out a photo album that was rarely opened. "Look at this," she said, opening to a specific page. "Do you remember that day?" The photo showed Rachel and me, probably at ages 9 and 12, embracing and smiling in front of a birthday cake. I wore oversized glasses, and Rachel had messy hair and a gap-toothed smile. "It was my birthday," Rachel recalled softly, smiling. "Claire spent the whole week helping me make invitations for the party, and you defended me when Melissa Parker said my glasses looked like the bottom of a bottle," I added, the memory vivid. "You even threw soda on her white dress." We laughed together, a sound we hadn't shared in years. "When did that change?" Mom asked, looking between us. "When did you stop being allies and become like this?" The question hung in the air, heavy as lead. None of us had a simple answer. There wasn't one specific moment, but a series of small fractures that, over time, grew into an insurmountable chasm. "I think it started when Dad got sick," Rachel said hesitantly. "You took on everything, Claire, and I didn't know how to help, so I ran away. And I resented you for running away," I admitted. "While I was drowning in responsibilities, you seemed to live in another world." "I felt guilty," she confessed, wiping away a tear. "Every time I came home and saw you managing everything, I felt so useless, so inadequate. It was easier to stay away than to face that I'd never be like you." That admission was like a curtain being pulled back after years of hiding. I had believed Rachel was indifferent to my sacrifice, when in reality, she was paralyzed by a feeling of inadequacy I had never noticed. "I never wanted you to be like me," I said softly. "I just wanted not to be alone in all this." Mom sat back down between us, taking our hands like she did when we were little. "It looks like we have a lot to talk about," she said with a sad smile. "And maybe this money isn't just a financial solution, but a chance for us to start over as a family." Her words touched something deep inside me. For 5 years, I had seen that financial legacy as a burden, a punishment for mistakes I never made. But now, for the first time, I envisioned the possibility that it could be a new beginning. "We need to set some rules," I said, reverting to my practical side. "Pay off the remaining debts, set aside an amount for Mom's retirement, and split the rest equally. And we need to talk about the future," added Rachel, surprising me. "I'm thinking of going back to school, graphic design. It's something I've always wanted to do, but never took seriously." Mom squeezed our hands, her eyes shining with renewed hope. "Tomorrow we can get together for breakfast," she suggested. "Talk more about everything, make plans, like a real family." "Real family," I repeated bitterly. "It reminds me of when Aunt Sonia visited last Christmas. You two planned that fancy dinner, and when I asked if I could help, you said there was only room for the real family in the kitchen because I'd be coming home late from work." Mom lowered her eyes, visibly ashamed. "I spoke without thinking, Claire. You know how I get when I'm nervous with visitors." "I know exactly how you are, Mom, and I know that deep down you've always seen my dedication to work as a sort of betrayal, like I chose to be away when, in fact, I was working to keep this family afloat." A heavy silence fell. Rachel looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Respect, perhaps. "Claire's right, Mom," she finally said. "We always penalize you for being responsible while I was given free rein for every little mistake. It's not fair." Mom took a deep breath, her hands trembling on her lap. "You're both right. I was inconsistent and unfair. I demanded too much of you, Claire, and too little of you, Rachel. In doing so, I did a disservice to both of you." She looked up, determination replacing guilt. "But we can change that. Starting today." That afternoon, the three of us did something we hadn't done in years. We talked, really talked, honestly, without filters or fear. We shared old hurts, unfair expectations, and the weight of being women in a family where roles were strictly defined. Rachel confessed her constant feeling of inadequacy, always living in my shadow of perfection. I admitted my resentment for carrying responsibilities that should have been shared. And Mom, for the first time, acknowledged how she had projected her own frustrations and fears onto us after a lifetime of submission to Dad. As the sun began to set, I felt strangely light, as if a weight I'd carried for decades had finally been acknowledged. "So, breakfast tomorrow?" Mom confirmed as we got ready to leave. "I'll be there," I promised. "Me too," said Rachel, and for the first time in years I believed her. On the way home, I texted my boss that I'd take the next day off, something I rarely did. Family Matters, I explained simply. And it was true. After 5 years focused solely on survival, maybe it was time to learn how to live. The next morning, I woke without the usual tightness in my chest, the constant anxiety that had become my unwanted companion. Instead, I felt something like hope, a nearly forgotten feeling, as fragile as the first leaves of spring. I arrived at Mom's at 9:00 a.m., bringing fresh bread from her favorite bakery. To my surprise, I found Rachel in the kitchen, preparing coffee and orange juice. "You're cooking?" I asked, genuinely astonished. She laughed, a light sound that reminded me of our childhood. "Don't exaggerate. I'm just squeezing oranges and boiling water. But it's a start, right?" Mom entered the kitchen in her robe, her hair tousled, a rare moment of relaxation. "My daughter's in the kitchen before 10 a.m. I must be dreaming," she joked, kissing our foreheads as she used to when we were little. Breakfast was calm and free of our usual tensions. We talked about small things, reminisced about childhood, and laughed over old photos Mom insisted on showing. For a few hours, it was as if the painful past had been paused, allowing us to glimpse what we could be as a family. It was during our second cup of coffee that Mom broached the inevitable topic. "I've been thinking about what we'll do with the money," she began hesitantly. "And I want you to know I agree with Claire. First, we pay off all the debts. Then we set aside a fund for my retirement. I don't want to be a burden on you later. And the rest is yours, split equally." Rachel and I exchanged surprised glances. Knowing Mom, we expected arguments, tears, and attempts at control. "Are you sure, Mom?" asked Rachel. "I thought you'd want to renovate the house, travel." "I do want that," Mom confirmed, "but with my own money, not yours. I've sacrificed too much of your sister's life out of my financial fears. I won't do that again." Tears welled up in my eyes, but they were different this time, not born of hurt, but of long-awaited recognition. "Thank you, Mom," I murmured, holding her hand on the table. "Don't thank me," she replied firmly. "I'm only doing what should have been done a long time ago, treating you both as equals, not as extensions of my own traumas." Rachel discreetly wiped away a tear. "So does that mean I can't use Mom's credit card to buy clothes anymore?" she joked, breaking the intensity. We laughed together, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of what our future might be. A family not perfect, but one where we could be honest, vulnerable, and truly human. In the months that followed, we worked with Mr. Mitchell to finalize the recovery of the stocks. As predicted, it took about 3 months until the money was available. During that time, something unexpected happened. We slowly began to rebuild our relationship. Rachel enrolled in a graphic design course and, to my amazement, proved dedicated and talented. I started taking occasional vacations, small breaks, to breathe and care for myself. And Mom, for the first time in decades, seemed to relax, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. When we finally received the money, we followed the plan we had set. We paid off all outstanding debts, created a generous retirement fund for Mom, and divided the remainder equally between Rachel and me. With my share, I did something I'd never imagined possible. I took a 3-month leave from work to travel around Europe. It was a long-forgotten dream revived. During those weeks, wandering ancient cobblestone streets, I felt layers of tension and responsibility melt away, as if I could finally breathe after years of suffocation. Surprisingly, Rachel invested part of her share in a small design studio and saved the rest to finish her studies. "I want to build something of my own," she said. "Something that makes me feel capable, like you always seem to be." Her words stirred a mix of pride and sadness in me. Pride because she was finally taking charge of her life, and sadness because I realized that for all those years, she had seen me as an unattainable ideal, rather than as a sister struggling with her own insecurities. Mom, for her part, allowed herself small luxuries she had long denied: a modest kitchen renovation, a trip to visit her sister in the South, even a painting course she'd always wanted to take. It was as if, freed from the burden of debts and secrets, she finally allowed herself to exist beyond the role of a financially burdened widow. 6 months after Mr. Mitchell's visit, on a spring Sunday, we gathered for a family lunch. There was no special occasion, no urgency, just a genuine desire to be together. The table set in the backyard, under an old oak tree, exuded a simplicity that contrasted with the complexity of our history. "Who would have thought?" Mom remarked as she served salad. that your father's forgotten investment would bring us not only financial security, but also this. She gestured around, not only at the bountiful table, but at us three, talking without the weight of unspoken resentments. I think the real inheritance wasn't the money, observed Rachel, surprising me with her newfound insight. It was the chance to truly see each other, without the masks we put on to survive. I nodded, smiling despite everything. I never thought I'd say this, but you're absolutely right, sis. Mark it on the calendar, Claire agreeing. With me without any arguments, she teased, and our laughter filled the afternoon. In that moment, amidst simple laughter and inexpensive wine, I realized we had finally arrived, not at perfection, not at a magical erasure of every past hurt, but at a place where we could be our true selves with each other. A place where I didn't have to be the perfect daughter, where Rachel wasn't forced to be the aimless rebel, and where Mom no longer had to pretend she had all the answers. Remember that dinner nearly a year ago? Mom asked suddenly, her tone serious. When I said there was only room for the real family? She lowered her eyes, ashamed. I'll never forgive myself for saying that. Mom, we already talked about it. I tried to soothe, uncomfortable with the turn of conversation on such a lovely day. No, Claire, I need to say this. She took a deep breath, looking directly into my eyes. That day, you said something that made me tremble. You said, if real family means ignoring sacrifices and rewarding irresponsibility, maybe I don't want to be a part of it anymore. I remembered those words, spoken in a moment of anger and extreme exhaustion. Words I never truly meant, but that had escaped from a wound left open by years of emotional neglect. You slammed the door, Mom continued, and I stayed awake all night, repeating those words. That's when I realized how much I had failed you, how much I had normalized your sacrifice as if it were your duty. And then I realized how selfish I was, added Rachel, holding my hand. How I accepted your help while still acting like a teenager, even as I approached 30. Silent tears rolled down my face, tears not of sorrow, but of liberation, as if an inner knot that had tightened for decades finally unraveled. I too made mistakes, I admitted, dabbing my eyes. I hid behind the role of the responsible, one to avoid facing my own fears. I criticized your choices, Rachel, even as I secretly envied your freedom, and I blamed both of you for decisions that, in part, were mine. Mom reached out, linking our hands together. The truth is, we all made mistakes. We all got things right and wrong. We all tried our best with the tools we had, she said, her voice thick with emotion. But now we have a chance to build something new, not a perfect family. God knows that doesn't exist, but a real one. One where we can be who we are, with all our virtues and flaws. A family where we can disagree without fear of losing each other's love, added Rachel. A family where responsibilities are shared, not imposed, I finished. A real family, Mom concluded, squeezing our hands. The afternoon sun filtered through the oak leaves, creating dancing patterns on the tablecloth. In the distance, the sounds of neighborhood children playing mingled with birdsong. It was a simple, almost mundane moment, but for me, it embodied a lifelong quest for belonging without the crushing weight of perfection. You know what I still wonder? Rachel broke the reflective silence. Did Dad ever know those stocks would be worth so much one day? I don't think so, Mom replied thoughtfully. Your father was impulsive. He probably invested in that company on a whim and then forgot about it. Or maybe, I suggested, he knew, but didn't live to see the result. A final attempt to fix his mistakes. I like that version, admitted Rachel, pouring another glass of wine. It makes him a more complex character than just the dad who left us in debt. Her remark caught me off guard. She was right. We had reduced Dad to his financial blunders, as if his entire existence could be summed up in a negative balance. We ignored the stories shared on stormy nights, the silly jokes that made us roll our eyes, the clumsy way he tried to fix things around the house, always making matters worse. He loved us in his own crooked way, I said softly, surprised at the tenderness in my voice. He just never knew how to show it without causing collateral damage. Just like all of us, Mom observed, a sad smile on her lips, loving awkwardly, stumbling over our own insecurities. In that moment, something shifted inside me. It wasn't forgiveness. Some wounds run too deep for that, but understanding. I began to see my father, my mother, my sister, and myself not as heroes or villains in a simplistic tale, but as complex, flawed human beings trying to navigate a chaotic world with incomplete maps. I realized that true liberation wasn't about finding someone to blame, but accepting the inherent imperfection in every relationship. That love and hurt can coexist, that responsibility doesn't have to mean martyrdom, and that growing up doesn't mean leaving the past behind, but rather integrating it into our story so that we become more whole. To us, I said, raising my glass in an impromptu toast. To our imperfect, complicated, and real family. To our family, they replied in unison, our glasses clinking under the afternoon sky. That simple melodic sound sealed something that words could never fully capture, a silent pact, a mutual promise to stick together, not despite our differences, but because of them. The next morning, I returned to work with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The same piles of documents, the same meetings, the same deadlines, but I was different. No longer was I the Claire who carried the world on her shoulders, but a woman who finally understood that strength comes not from bearing everything alone, but from knowing when to share the load. Later that afternoon, Rachel called, excited, about her first client at her design studio. It's small, a logo for a local coffee shop, she said, pride evident in her voice. But it's a start, right? Every great journey begins with a single step, I replied, genuinely happy for her enthusiasm. It's going to be amazing, Rachel. I'm sure of it. Thanks for believing in me, she said, her tone turning serious. Even when I didn't believe in myself. That's what sisters do, I replied simply. That's what real family does, she corrected. That phrase, real family, which for so long had symbolized exclusion and favoritism, now carried an entirely new meaning, no longer a rigid definition based on conformity, but a fluid concept built daily through small acts of love, understanding, and mutual respect. 3 months later, as we gathered to celebrate Mom's birthday, I realized we had truly transformed that expression. Our real family now included not just the three of us, but also Rachel's boyfriend, a quiet, kind literature teacher, and my friend Denise, who had started joining me for Sunday lunches after her separation. We were no longer defined solely by blood or social expectations, but by the conscious choice to remain present in each other's lives, even when it would have been easier to walk away. You know what I realized? Mom remarked as she blew out the candles on her cake. For the first time in years, I'm not looking to the future with fear, but with curiosity. That simple observation summed up our journey, from fear to curiosity, from survival to living, from duty to the love we choose every day, even when things get tough. On a quiet evening, as I sorted through old boxes in my apartment, I found a photo I hadn't seen in years. In it, Dad is holding baby Rachel, while I, at 3 years old, reached out with eager little hands. Mom, young and radiant, watched us with a look that mixed exhaustion and adoration. I stared at that image for a long time, realizing that in that frozen moment we were just possibilities. Children not yet molded by unequal expectations, parents not yet burdened by their biggest mistakes, a family at the very beginning of its story, carrying dreams and fears that would shape who we became. I snapped a photo of that old picture and sent it to Rachel with a simple message. Look what I found. Weren't we beautiful? Her reply came almost immediately. We still are. We just took too long to realize it. I smiled at my phone, feeling that invisible connection that, despite all the hurt and misunderstandings, had never been completely broken. A bond that, as I learned, doesn't have to be perfect to be precious. That night, I brought the photo to dinner at Mom's. When I showed it, I saw her eyes well up instantly. I remember that day, she said, caressing the image with her fingertips. Your father had just landed that job at the construction company. We were so full of hope. What happened to that hope? Rachel asked, glancing over Mom's shoulder. Life, she replied simply. Financial struggles, dashed expectations, disappointments. We did the best we could with what we had, but sometimes it wasn't enough. Maybe enough is just an illusion, I suggested. Maybe we're all just trying, failing, learning, and trying again. Late wisdom from the eldest daughter, Rachel teased, nudging me lightly. Who would have thought the compulsive perfectionist would one day accept that perfection is just a mirage? I laughed, recognizing the truth in her words. It took time. and a nervous breakdown, and an unexpected inheritance, and 2 stubborn women forcing me to see beyond my own limitations. Mom wrapped us in an awkward, warm hug, still holding the photo. "We are imperfect," she said. "Thank God for that. Perfection is static. Imperfection keeps us moving, growing, evolving." That night, as I returned to my apartment under a starry sky, I reflected on how life rarely follows the path we plan, how losses can turn into unexpected gains, and how broken relationships can be rebuilt, not as they once were, but perhaps even stronger than before. I realized that a real family isn't one that never errs, but one that stays together despite mistakes. It isn't a family that avoids conflict at all costs, but one that finds its way back to love even after the worst storms. And as I opened the door to my apartment, a place that once was a refuge and fortress against the pain of not belonging, I realized it was now simply a space to rest between meetings with people who finally saw me for who I was, not as the perfect daughter, the responsible sister, or the unwavering anchor, but as Claire, complex, fallible, and still in the making. I glanced at my phone and saw a message from Rachel. "Tomorrow I'm pitching a project to an important client. I'm super nervous. Any advice from the expert in looking confident even when you're dying inside?" I smiled, recognizing not just a plea for help, but an acknowledgement of her value, a bridge across waters that had kept us apart for so long. Take a deep breath, prepare even more than you think you need, and remember, you are Rachel Anderson, creative, resilient, and above all, real. The rest is just details. Her reply came instantly. "You always had the right words, even when you drove me crazy with them." "Never did you hate me," I responded softly. "You only hated the burden placed on both of us. Different burdens, but equally unfair." "Who would have thought we'd find this clarity someday?" she asked. "Real family," I typed, smiling at the screen. It took us a while, but we got there. That night, I slept without the familiar weight of anxiety over uncertain tomorrows. Instead of apprehension, I felt a calm born not of certainty that everything would work out, but from knowing that, even when things go wrong, as they inevitably will, I wouldn't have to face them alone. The imperfect, complicated, and real family we built from the ruins of broken expectations and deferred dreams was stronger than any ideal we could have ever chased. It was real. It was ours. And that, finally, was more than enough.